What's the hold-up? Did the cleaning lady get lost again? A voice rang out soft as falling snow, but cold enough to bite through bone. The entire ballroom turned. And then, the laughter started snickers that hissed, spread, and multiplied like a virus. Right under $1 million chandelier on the gleaming marble floor was Clara Weston, bent over hands, trembling as she picked up shards of broken glass and a spilled glass of champagne soaking the white gown of a high society woman. She hadn't dropped it. The other woman had flicked her hand deliberately. But who would care? In this world, blame always falls on the one in uniform, not the one carrying a Prada clutch. Clara stayed bent, her cheek flushed red from a slap of cold wine. Her fingers were scratched by glass, yet she kept her head down, gathering every shard like she was apologizing to the whole world simply for existing. She looks like a waitress from a bus stop diner, or a mistake that wandered into the wrong room. Each word sliced into Clara's skin like thin blades. But what made the observers hold their breath wasn't what they said it was, that she said nothing back. No protest, no tears, no escape, only a single upward glance, slow, composed, and strangely proud. Those eyes said, "You may look down on me, but I refuse to do the same to myself." And then, at table 14, a man quietly set down his wine glass. No one knew who he was, but he had seen everything. And Gideon Blackwell, the anonymous billionaire and owner of this hotel, had just found a reason to change one person's fate, not out of pity, but because he had just witnessed dignity, true dignity, in a room that had forgotten what kindness even meant. The room slowly returned to its artificial rhythm. Music swelled as if nothing had happened. Polite smiles, clinking glasses, and shimmering lights danced across the surface of expensive diamonds. And in the midst of all that luxury, Clara was still picking up the shattered pieces of the humiliation she had just endured. No manager appeared. No one asked if she was hurt. She was simply alone, as if her very presence in the room was some kind of mistake. But in the farthest corner of the ballroom at table 14, one man still hadn't bowed his head to the festivities. He sat there, his eyes fixed on Clara, not with pity, but with the razor-sharp focus of someone accustomed to looking straight into the core of a person. Gideon Blackwell, the anonymous billionaire, the true owner of the hotel chain hosting tonight's lavish gala. No one here knew who he was. They only saw a middle-aged man in a plain gray suit, nothing flashy. But what they didn't realize was that his gaze was the only thing in that entire room worth fearing. Gideon hadn't come for dinner or to shake hands with the elite. He was here to observe in silence, a ritual he performed once a year to go undercover, appear unannounced, and quietly evaluate who within his empire still possessed enough integrity to deserve their place. And tonight he had seen enough. A staff member was publicly humiliated, a violent act disguised as high society behavior, and an entire room complicit in silence. But among them all, only one person refused to bow her head: Clara. She stood, her hands still trembling, her cheek still flushed from the cold wine, but her eyes unchanged. When she faced the woman who had just humiliated her, Clara didn't scream, didn't argue. She simply bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, ma'am. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." Not a trace of venom, but each word landed like a slap across the face of false superiority. She didn't need power to hold on to her dignity. At that moment, Gideon Blackwell made his decision. He signaled to a passing server, handed over a note, and whispered a few words: "Tell the floor manager to meet me in the West Wing lounge." Now, that was all. No noise, no visible sign, but a storm had been set in motion. A quiet shift in power. No theatrics, no spotlight, had begun to ripple out from table 14. Just 10 minutes after the server received the note from table 14, the backstage atmosphere of the Ritz-Carlton turned into a silent storm. The night shift manager, Thomas Vickery, received an urgent call. When he picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't loud or harsh, but it was so cold and precise that it made his throat tighten. "Mr. Blackwell would like to see you in the West Wing lounge. Immediately." That name hit like a punch to the chest. Vickery knew exactly who he was dealing with, and more importantly, he knew what had happened tonight. At the same time, Clara, who had just ended her shift with a heavy heart, was approached by a staff member delivering an unbelievable message. "Someone wants to meet you in the West Wing lounge." Her eyes widened in disbelief. Who, why? But amidst the chaos of emotion, she nodded. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just a regular request. Inside the most exclusive lounge on the third floor, reserved only for senior shareholders and the executive board, Gideon sat alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a cold espresso and warm amber lighting surrounded him. When Thomas entered, sweat glistening on his brow, he bowed without daring to raise his head. "Sir, I didn't know you were visiting this property." Gideon didn't look up. He simply said one line, "I'm not here as a visitor. I'm here as an owner, watching how people are being treated under my roof." Every word landed like a stone on Thomas's chest. Moments later, Clara entered, nervous, reserved, but not weak. When her eyes met Gideon's, she froze. Not because she recognized him, but because he was looking at her, as if she were the center of the room. Not a mistake, not trash, but a human being seen and heard. Gideon stood and offered a gentle smile, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "Miss Weston, please have a seat. I owe you more than just an apology." Clara had no idea what was happening. Meanwhile, Thomas's face had turned ghostly pale. Gideon didn't waste time. He asked Thomas to recount what had happened that evening, every detail. But each time Thomas tried to downplay the situation, Gideon interrupted with a security camera clip played from the iPad in front of him. Every insult, every act of wine-throwing, every look of contempt, it was all there. Undeniable, uneditable, no longer ignorable. "Under my brand," Gideon said slowly, "we don't humiliate people for doing honest work. You failed that standard. So, as of this moment, you're relieved from duty." And just like that, Thomas was fired on the spot. No defense, no negotiation. Clara was speechless. She didn't know what to say. But before she could even open her mouth, Gideon turned to her and said a sentence she would remember for the rest of her life. "You were the only one in that room who held dignity even when others threw dirt. That's the kind of strength I look for, and it can't be taught." He handed her a business card on the back, a handwritten note, "Leadership Program. Fast Track. You start Monday if you say yes." On Monday morning, Clara Weston walked into the headquarters of Blackwell Hospitality in a simple grey suit. No more worn-out apron, no more eyes glued to the floor, but as someone learning how to walk among those who once acted as if she didn't exist. The long hallway led to the Executive Leadership Training Center, a space once reserved solely for heirs of the elite or Ivy League graduates. But today, the person stepping through the glass doors was the same girl who had once picked up shards of broken glass with bloodied hands. Clara didn't know why Gideon had chosen her. She had no business degree, no formal leadership background, but she did possess something he said could never be taught, the kind of resilience that doesn't break even in silence. The first week was hell. The other trainees, dressed like they were headed to a global summit, didn't bother to speak to her. Some watched her, like reality TV waitress trying to become a boss. There were scoffs behind her back, and even someone who asked outright, "Did you get in through some charity quota?" Clara didn't react. She took notes, studied twice as hard, stayed up later, and absorbed every bit of feedback like her life depended on it. And then slowly, unexpectedly, something changed. During a crisis scenario drill, when the entire class panicked over a fictional VIP threatening to sue over a missing handbag, Clara was the only one to ask the right question. Who cleaned the room that day? And do we have hallway camera footage? She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply thinking like someone who had once stood at the very bottom of the service chain. She understood the system from the roots. What others read in textbooks, she had lived. Gideon watched everything from a distance. No interventions, no rewards. He let Clara rise or fall on her own, just as he once had. But when the trainer reports began to note, Clara has an unspoken influence over the class. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, everyone listens. He knew he hadn't been wrong. By week 4, during an internal presentation, one trainee deliberately stole Clara's idea, dressed it up with polished language, and earned a round of applause. Clara said nothing. She simply sat down. But at the end of class, she quietly handed the instructor her original hand-drawn sketch, dated the day before, with a single line written beneath it, "I don't need applause. I need fairness." The next day, the other trainee received a formal warning, and for the first time, Clara was nominated to a project leadership group. No one laughed anymore. No one dared to look down on her. The once overlooked waitress had become the quiet wind shifting the entire system. No drama, no revenge, just consistency and professional ethics sharp as a blade that never rusts. The annual Excellence in Hospitality Awards night was held at the very hotel where Clara had once been humiliated. The grand sapphire hall was adorned in splendor, crystal lights, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and a crowd of VIPs from across the hospitality industry, from executives to international investors. On the main stage, a massive LED screen displayed the words "Keynote Speaker Clara Weston, Leadership Award recipient." Clara stepped out, not the girl in an apron with downcast eyes, but a poised woman in an elegant black gown, her hair in a high bun, her gaze calm and unwavering, as if every look of contempt from the past had faded into mere echoes. Yet in the audience, there were faces she could not forget. The woman who had once poured wine onto her chest sat in the third row, staring up without blinking. The former floor manager, who had stood still like a statue while Clara was publicly shamed, now worked for a subcontracted partner and had to bow politely when Clara walked past. They said nothing, but every glance was a silent reckoning with a conscience not yet cleansed. Gideon Blackwell sat quietly at the VIP table, no grand gestures, but his eyes held the pride of a mentor watching his student rise even higher than he had. On stage, Clara began with a line no one expected. 2 years ago, I stood in this room, not on this stage, but on my knees, cleaning up broken glass. The room went still. That night, I was told I didn't belong, that I was cheap, that I smelled like work. She paused, locking eyes with the front row, where those who once ridiculed her now sat frozen. Today, I'm not here to take revenge. I'm here to remind all of us, dignity doesn't wear a price tag. Kindness is not a weakness, and the way you treat people when no one's watching is the loudest thing you'll ever say about yourself. The ballroom remained silent, not out of fear, but because her words had struck directly at what many thought they had hidden well. When Clara finished her speech, it wasn't just applause that followed. It was a standing ovation, thunderous, unrelenting. And then what no one saw coming happened. The very woman who had humiliated Clara that night stepped shakily onto the stage, not to apologize in front of a crowd, but to personally hand Clara the glass trophy, recognizing her as the night's most inspiring figure. Her hands trembled as she passed it over. Gone was the disdain of the past. In its place, a silent plea for forgiveness, wordless but real. Clara accepted the trophy with both hands, smiled gently. No retaliation, no bitterness, just a single, respectful nod. And in that moment, she didn't just win, she transcended every definition of success. She became a symbol. The award night ended in a flurry of flashbulbs and praise, but in a quiet corner of the VIP lounge, where only the soft clinking of wine glasses and warm lighting remained, Gideon Blackwell sat across from Clara. There was no longer a gap between the CEO and former staff. Just two people, one seasoned the other, having just risen through an entire system by the strength of her character. Clara, he began his voice, low and steady, but carrying the weight of truth. I wasn't just an anonymous patron or a passive shareholder. I am the chairman of the Blackwell Group, and I've been watching you since the night you were humiliated in this very ballroom. Clara froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. All those seemingly random encounters, the quiet advice, the doors that opened when they shouldn't have there, had been a guiding hand all along. But he had never pushed, never interfered. He had let her walk every trial so that when she reached the next step, she would know it was earned. Gideon placed a small black velvet box on the table. Not a proposal, but something even more profound. The keys to managing the hotel empire that bore his name. Clara Weston. He said, I've met all kinds of leaders, those who command, those who speak well, those who calculate every move. But very few know how to listen, to endure, to hold on to their dignity even when trampled. And I believe this industry, this world, needs more people like you. Clara was stunned, not by the power being offered, but by the responsibility suddenly resting on her shoulders. She thought of all the people, like her, overlooked, silenced, buried beneath reputations and privilege. If she accepted, she would be the first in the company's history not to come from an elite background, not to hold an MBA, not to bear the Blackwell name. But that, she realized, was exactly what made change possible. After a long pause, Clara placed her hand gently on the box. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked Gideon straight in the eyes. I'll accept, she said, but on one condition. I want every frontline employee in this company to be properly trained and given the same kind of opportunity I was. Gideon smiled, nodding slowly. And that is exactly why I chose you. That very night, an internal memo was sent to over 42,000 employees across the globe. The subject line read only, a new chapter begins, meet our future. And below it, a photo of Clara Weston with the title, Incoming Executive Director, People First Initiative. 6 months after her appointment, Blackwell Group entered a phase of full-scale reform. Several top-level positions were streamlined, and the entire recruitment system was redesigned by Clara herself. Gone were the preferences for glittering resumes from prestigious universities. In their place stood new criteria, practical ability, human decency, and the capacity to lead through trust. On a Tuesday morning, among the line of candidates interviewing for the role of Director of Guest Relations at the flagship New York hotel, the very department where Clara had once been humiliated, stood a well-dressed woman with a subtle tension etched across her face. Her name, Victoria Langston. Yes, that Victoria, the woman who had once flung wine onto Clara's chest, searing into memory the words, "You smell cheap. This place deserves better than you." Victoria had once been a regional director at another luxury hotel chain, but a media scandal involving discriminatory behavior toward her staff had forced her to resign. Now, in a harsher job market, she found herself applying to a company run by the very person she had once degraded. Inside the interview room, Clara sat centered in her chair. The overhead lights were soft, not cold, but it was her calm presence that gave the space its weight. When Victoria walked in and recognized who would be interviewing her, she froze. In a matter of seconds, her expression shifted from haughty to ashamed, and finally to afraid. Clara showed no sign of contempt. She offered a faint smile, opened her laptop, and said in an even tone, "Thank you for coming, Ms. Langston. Let's begin." The interview followed standard procedure questions, answers, scenario analysis. But at the very end, Clara gently closed her laptop, looked directly at Victoria, and said, "You once said I smelled cheap. But today, I'm in a position to give you a job or not. So let me ask you, what have you learned about dignity?" Since the last time we met, Victoria lowered her gaze. She didn't respond right away. The silence in the room stretched longer than usual. Then she took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, let the mask drop. "I learned that power doesn't make you valuable. How you treat those with less power than you does." Clara held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll consider your application. Just like everyone else. Fairly." And as Victoria walked out of the room, not knowing whether she would be hired or not, the audience wouldn't remember her shame. What they would remember was the calm in Clara's eyes. A woman once publicly humiliated, now holding the power to destroy, but choosing fairness over revenge. 2 years after Clara accepted the keys to leadership, the global hospitality industry underwent a quiet yet seismic transformation. It wasn't sparked by billion-dollar marketing campaigns or collaborations with powerful tycoons, but by a woman once dismissed as cheap-smelling, who dared to rise not just for herself, but to blaze a trail for thousands who had once been stepped on just like her. Under Clara's leadership, Blackwell Group launched the Lead with Dignity Academy, a management training program designed specifically for frontline employees, where they learned not just operations, but how to lead with respect. Clara herself taught the first class, in a grand room filled with seats occupied by workers in labor uniforms, no suits, no ties, no business cards. She opened her lecture with a single line: "I wasn't born for this stage. I earned it, and so will you." The company's new policies spread like dominoes. Competitor corporations were forced to reevaluate their recruitment models, internal policies, and leadership cultures. The media dubbed it the Clara Effect, a revolution where an organization's value was no longer measured by spreadsheets, but by how it treated its most vulnerable members. On the 100th anniversary of Blackwell Group, Clara, at just 35 years old, was invited to speak before 12,000 global employees at the Grand Dome Stadium. She didn't choose a dazzling stage or poetic speeches. She walked up, holding a single object, the old apron she wore the day she was humiliated. Raising it high, she said, "This is not a symbol of shame. This is a badge of honor, because the hands that clean serve, carry and endure deserve to lead, not just obey." The entire stadium stood, and this time, no one laughed. They cried, they applauded, and in her, they saw themselves. That evening, the New York Times published a headline: "The girl they called cheap now runs the industry with grace." And the most shared comment beneath it read, "I watched this story with tears in my eyes." Thank you, Clara, for reminding us that being kind isn't weakness. It's power, the kind the world needs most. Dear friends, if Clara Weston's story touched your heart, It's probably not because she became a successful CEO, but because she dared to be kind in a world that once turned its back on her. The greatest lesson here isn't about how she climbed to the top. It's about how she stayed kind once she got there. Clara didn't choose revenge. She didn't use power to hurt those who once humiliated her. Instead, she used it to rebuild a fairer system, one where every person, whether a server or a security guard, is given a voice and a chance to rise. The most powerful message this story leaves behind is this: in a world too quick to judge by appearances, it is kindness, quiet, often unseen, that has the power to start a revolution. And to me, that is real strength. Because kindness is not weakness, it's the courage to be different. If you've ever been underestimated, looked down on for where you came from, or how you looked, don't let them define you. Let your actions and time do that. If today's story stirred something in you, leave a comment below, because your words might inspire someone who desperately needs them. Don't forget to hit like if you believe in the power of kindness. Share to spread the message, and subscribe to Toch Story so you never miss a story that touches the heart, where every video isn't just a tale, but a reminder that humanity can still be good and the world is still worth hoping for.